Chapter 24 of Far from the Madding Crowd. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Tig Hines. Far from the Madding Crowd by Thomas Hardy. Chapter 24. The same night. The Fir Plantation. Among the multifarious duties which Bathsheba had voluntarily imposed upon herself by dispensing with the services of a bailiff, was the particular one of looking round the homestead before going to bed, to see that all was right and safe for the night. Gabriel had almost constantly preceded her in this tour every evening, watching her affairs as carefully as any specially appointed officer of surveillance could have done. But this tender devotion was to a great extent unknown to his mistress, and as much as was known was somewhat thanklessly received. Women are never tired of bewailing man's fickleness in love, but they only seem to snub his constancy. As watching is best done invisibly, she usually carried a dark lantern in her hand, and every now and then turned on the lantern to examine nooks and corners with the coolness of a metropolitan policeman. This coolness may have owed its existence not so much to her fearlessness of expected danger as to her freedom from the suspicion of any. Her worst anticipated discovery being that a horse might not be well bedded, the fowls not all in, or a door not closed. This night the buildings were inspected as usual, and she went round to the farm paddock. Here the only sounds disturbing the stillness were steady munchings of many mouths, and stentorian breathings from all but invisible noses, ending in snores and puffs like the blowing of bellows slowly. Then the munching would recommence, when the lively imagination might assist the eye to discern a group of pink-white nostrils, shaped as caverns, and very clammy and humid on their surfaces, not exactly pleasant to the touch until one got used to them, the mouths beneath having a great partiality for closing upon any loose end of Bathsheba's apparel which came within reach of their tongues. Above each of these a still keener vision suggested a brown forehead and two staring, though not unfriendly eyes, and above all a pair of whitish crescent-shaped horns, like two particularly new moons. An occasional stolid moo, proclaiming beyond the shade of a doubt that these phenomena were the features of the persons of Daisy, Whitefoot, Bonny Lass, Jolly-O, Spot, Twinkle-Eye, etc., etc., the respectable dairy of Devon cows belonging to Bathsheba aforesaid. Her way back to the house was by a path through a young plantation of tapering firs, which had been planted some years earlier to shelter the premises from the north wind. By reason of the density of the interwoven foliage overhead, it was gloomy there at cloudless noontide, twilight in the evening, dark as midnight at dusk, and black as the ninth plague of Egypt at midnight. To describe the spot is to call it a vast, low, naturally formed hall, the plumy ceiling of which was supported by slender pillars of living wood, the floor being covered with a soft dun carpet of dead spikelets and mildewed cones, with a tuft of grass blades here and there. This bit of the path was always the crux of the night's ramble, though before starting her apprehensions of danger were not vivid enough to lead her to take a companion. Slipping along here covertly as time, Bathsheba fancied she could hear footsteps entering the track at the opposite end. It was certainly a rustle of footsteps. Her own instantly fell as gently as snowflakes. She reassured herself by a remembrance that the path was public, and that the traveller was probably some villager returning home, regretting at the same time that the meeting should be about to occur in the darkest point of her route, even though just outside her own door. The noise approached, came close, and the figure was apparently on the point of gliding past her, when something tugged at her skirt and pinned it forcibly to the ground. The instantaneous check nearly threw Bathsheba off her balance. In recovering, she struck against warm clothes and buttons. "A rum start, upon my soul," said a masculine voice a foot or so above her head. "Have I hurt you, mate?" "No," said Bathsheba, attempting to shrink away. "We have got hitched together somehow, I think." "Yes." "Are you a woman?" "Yes." "A lady, I should have said." "It doesn't matter." "I am a man." "Oh!" Bathsheba softly tugged again, but to no purpose. "Is that a dark lantern you have? I fancy so," said the man. "Yes." "If you'll allow me, I'll open it and set you free." His hand seized the lantern. The door was opened. The rays burst out from their prison, and Bathsheba beheld her position with astonishment. The man to whom she was hooked was brilliant in brass and scarlet. He was a soldier. His sudden appearance was to darkness what the sound of a trumpet is to silence. Gloom, the genius loci at all times hitherto, was now totally overthrown, less by the lantern light than by what the lantern lighted. The contrast of this revelation with her anticipations of some sinister figure in sombre garb was so great that it had upon her the effect of a fairy transformation. It was immediately apparent that the military man's spur had become entangled in the gimp which decorated the skirt of her dress. He caught a view of her face. "I'll unfasten you in one moment, miss," he said with newborn gallantry. "Oh, no, I can do it, thank you," she hastily replied, and stooped for the performance. The unfastening was not such a trifling affair. The rowel of the spur had so wound itself among the gimp cords in those few moments that separation was likely to be a matter of time. He too stooped, and the lantern, standing on the ground betwixt them, threw a gleam from its open side among the fir-tree needles and the blades of long damp grass, with the effect of a large glow-worm. It radiated upwards into their faces, and sent over half the plantation gigantic shadows of both man and woman, each dusky shape becoming distorted and mangled upon the tree trunks till it was wasted to nothing. He looked hard into her eyes when she raised them for a moment. Bathsheba looked down again, for his gaze was too strong to be received point blank with her own. But she had obliquely noticed that he was young and slim, and that he wore 3 chevrons upon his sleeve. Bathsheba pulled again. "You are a prisoner, miss. It's no use blinking the matter," said the soldier dryly. "I must cut your dress if you are in such a hurry." "Yes, please do," she exclaimed helplessly. "It wouldn't be necessary if you could wait a moment." And he unwound a cord from the little wheel. She withdrew her own hand, but whether by accident or design he touched it. Bathsheba was vexed, she hardly knew why. His unravelling went on, but it nevertheless seemed coming to no end. She looked at him again. "Thank you for the sight of such a beautiful face," said the young sergeant without ceremony. She coloured with embarrassment. "'Twas unwillingly shown," she replied stiffly, and with as much dignity, which was very little, as she could infuse into a position of captivity. "I like you the better for that incivility, miss," he said. "I should have liked. I wish you had never shown yourself to me by intruding here." She pulled again, and the gathers of her dress began to give way, like Lilliputian musketry. "I deserve the chastisement your words give me, but why should such a fair and dutiful girl have such an aversion to her father's sex?" "Go on your way, please." "What, Beauty, and drag you after me? Do but look. I never saw such a tangle." "Oh, 'tis shameful of you. You have been making it worse on purpose to keep me here. You have." "Indeed, I don't think so," said the sergeant with a merry twinkle. "I tell you you have," she exclaimed in high temper. "I insist upon undoing it. Now allow me." "Certainly, miss. I am not of steel," he added with a sigh which had as much archness in it as a sigh could possess, without losing its nature altogether. "I am thankful for beauty, even when it's thrown to me like a bone to a dog. These moments will be over too soon." She closed her lips in a determined silence. Bathsheba was revolving in her mind whether by a bold and desperate rush she could free herself at the risk of leaving her skirt bodily behind her. The thought was too dreadful. The dress, which she had put on to appear stately at the supper, was the head and front of her wardrobe. Not another in her stock became her so well. What woman in Bathsheba's position, not naturally timid, and within call of her retainers, would have bought escape from a dashing soldier at so dear a price? "All in good time. It will soon be done, I perceive," said her cool friend.
"This trifling provokes, and—
"Not too cruel."
insults me."
"It is done in order that I may have the pleasure of apologizing to so charming a woman, which I straightway do most humbly, madam," he said, bowing low. Bathsheba really knew not what to say. "I've seen a good many women in my time," continued the man in a murmur, and more thoughtfully than hitherto, critically regarding her bent head at the same time. "But I've never seen a woman so beautiful as you. Take it or leave it, be offended or like it, I don't care."
Who are you, then, who can so well afford to despise opinion?
"No stranger. Sergeant Troy. I am staying at this place. There, it is undone at last, you see. Your light fingers were more eager than mine. I wish it had been the knot of knots which there is no untying." This was worse and worse. She started up, and so did he. How to decently get away from him, that was her difficulty now. She sidled off inch by inch, the lantern in her hand, till she could see the redness of his coat no longer. "Ah, Beauty, good-bye," he said. She made no reply, and reaching a distance of 20 or 30 yards, turned about and ran indoors. Liddy had just retired to rest. In ascending to her own chamber, Bathsheba opened the girl's door an inch or two, and, panting, said,
Liddy, is any soldier staying in the village? Sergeant somebody, rather gentlemanly for a sergeant, and good-looking, a red coat with blue facings.
"No, miss."
No, say I, but really it might be Sergeant Troy home on furlough, though I have not seen him.
He was here once in that way when the regiment was at Casterbridge.
Yes, that's the name. He had a moustache, no whiskers or beard.
He had.
What kind of person is he?
"Oh, miss, I blush to name it, a gay man. But I know him to be very quick and trim, who might have made his thousands like a squire, such a clever young dandy as he is. He's a doctor's son by name, which is a great deal, and he's an earl's son by nature." "Which is a great deal more, I fancy. Is it true?" "Yes, and he was brought up so well, and sent to Casterbridge Grammar School for years and years, learnt all languages while he was there, and it was said that he got on so far that he could take down Chinese in shorthand, but that I don't answer for, as it was only reported. However, he wasted his gifted lot, and listed a soldier, but even then he rose to be sergeant without trying at all. Ah, such a blessing it is to be high-born. Nobility of blood will shine out even in the ranks and files. And is he really come home, miss?"
I believe so. Good night, Liddy.
After all, how could a cheerful wearer of skirts be permanently offended with a man? There are occasions when girls like Bathsheba will put up with a great deal of unconventional behaviour, when they want to be praised, which is often, when they want to be mastered, which is sometimes, and when they want no nonsense, which is seldom. Just now the first feeling was in the ascendant with Bathsheba, with a dash of the second. Moreover, by chance or by devilry, the ministrant was antecedently made interesting by being a handsome stranger who had evidently seen better days. So she could not clearly decide whether it was her opinion that he had insulted her or not.
Was ever anything so odd? She at last exclaimed to herself in her own room. And was ever anything so meanly done as what I did, to skulk away like that from a man who was only civil and kind?
Clearly she did not think this barefaced praise of her person an insult now. It was a fatal omission of Boldwood's that he had never once told her she was beautiful. Chapter 25. The New Acquaintance Described. Idiosyncrasy and vicissitude had combined to stamp Sergeant Troy as an exceptional being. He was a man to whom memories were an encumbrance, and anticipations a superfluity. Simply feeling, considering, and caring for what was before his eyes, he was vulnerable only in the present. His outlook upon time was as a transient flash of the eye now and then, that projection of consciousness into days gone by and to come, which makes the past a synonym for the pathetic, and the future a word for circumspection, which was foreign to Troy. With him the past was yesterday, the future tomorrow, never the day after. On this account he might in certain lights have been regarded as one of the most fortunate of his order. For it may be argued, with great plausibility, that reminiscence is less an endowment than a disease, and that expectation in its only comfortable form, that of absolute faith, is practically an impossibility. whilst in the form of hope and the secondary compounds, patience, impatience, resolve, curiosity, it is a constant fluctuation between pleasure and pain. Sergeant Troy, being entirely innocent of the practice of expectation, was never disappointed. To set against this negative gain there may have been some positive losses from a certain narrowing of the higher tastes and sensations which it entailed. But limitation of the capacity is never recognized as a loss by the loser therefrom. In this attribute moral or aesthetic poverty contrasts plausibly with material, since those who suffer do not mind it, whilst those who mind it soon cease to suffer. It is not a denial of anything to have been always without it, and what Troy had never enjoyed he did not miss. But, being fully conscious that what sober people missed he enjoyed, his capacity, though really less, seemed greater than theirs. He was moderately truthful towards men, but to women lied like a Cretan, a system of ethics above all others calculated to win popularity at the first flush of admission into lively society, and the possibility of the favour gained being transitory had reference only to the future. He never passed the line which divides the spruce vices from the ugly, and hence, though his morals had hardly been applauded, disapproval of them had frequently been tempered with a smile. This treatment had led to his becoming a sort of regrater of other men's gallantries, to his own aggrandizement as a Corinthian, rather than to the moral profit of his hearers. His reason and his propensities had seldom any reciprocating influence, having separated by mutual consent long ago. Thence it sometimes happened that, whilst his intentions were as honourable as could be wished, any particular deed formed a dark background which threw them into fine relief. The sergeant's vicious phases being the offspring of impulse, and his virtuous phases of cool meditation, the latter had a modest tendency to be oftener heard of than seen. Troy was full of activity, but his activities were less of a locomotive than a vegetative nature, and never being based upon any original choice of foundation or direction, they were exercised on whatever object chance might place in their way. Hence, whilst he sometimes reached the brilliant in speech because that was spontaneous, he fell below the commonplace in action, from inability to guide incipient effort. He had a quick comprehension and considerable force of character, but, being without the power to combine them, the comprehension became engaged with trivialities whilst waiting for the will to direct it, and the force wasted itself in useless grooves through unheeding the comprehension. He was a fairly well-educated man for one of middle class, exceptionally well-educated for a common soldier. He spoke fluently and unceasingly. He could in this way be one thing and seem another. For instance, he could speak of love and think of dinner, call on the husband to look at the wife, be eager to pay and intend to owe. The wondrous power of flattery in passados at woman is a perception so universal as to be remarked upon by many people almost as automatically as they repeat a proverb, or say that they are Christians and the like, without thinking much of the enormous corollaries which spring from the proposition. Still less is it acted upon for the good of the complemental being alluded to. With the majority, such an opinion is shelved with all those trite aphorisms which require some catastrophe to bring their tremendous meanings thoroughly home. When expressed with some amount of reflectiveness, it seems coordinate with a belief that this flattery must be reasonable to be effective. It is to the credit of men that few attempt to settle the question by experiment, and it is for their happiness, perhaps, that accident has never settled it for them. Nevertheless, that a male dissembler who, by deluging her with untenable fictions, charms the female wisely, may acquire powers reaching to the extremity of perdition, is a truth taught to many by unsought and ringing occurrences. And some profess to have attained to the same knowledge by experiment as aforesaid, and jauntily continue their indulgence in such experiments with terrible effect. Sergeant Troy was one. He had been known to observe casually that in dealing with womankind the only alternative to flattery was cursing and swearing. There was no third method. "Treat them fairly, and you are a lost man," he would say. This person's public appearance in Weatherbury promptly followed his arrival there. A week or two after the shearing, Bathsheba, feeling a nameless relief of spirits on account of Boldwood's absence, approached her hayfields and looked over the hedge towards the haymakers. They consisted in about equal proportions of gnarled and flexuous forms, the former being the men, the latter the women, who wore tilt bonnets covered with nankeen, which hung in a curtain upon their shoulders. Coggan and Mark Clark were mowing in a less forward meadow, Clark humming a tune to the strokes of his scythe, to which Jan made no attempt to keep time with his. In the first mead they were already loading hay, the women raking it into cocks and windrows, and the men tossing it upon the waggon. From behind the waggon a bright scarlet spot emerged, and went on loading unconcernedly with the rest. It was the gallant sergeant, who had come haymaking for pleasure, and nobody could deny that he was doing the mistress of the farm real night service by his voluntary contribution of his labour at a busy time. As soon as she had entered the field, Troy saw her, and sticking his pitchfork into the ground and picking up his crop or cane, he came forward. Bathsheba blushed with a half-angry embarrassment, and adjusted her eyes, as well as her feet, to the direct line of her path. Chapter 26. Seen on the verge of the haymead. "Ah, Miss Everdene," said the sergeant, touching his diminutive cap, "little did I think it was you I was speaking to the other night, and yet, if I had reflected, the Queen of the Corn Market, truth is truth at any hour of day or night, and I heard you so named in Casterbridge yesterday, the Queen of the Corn Market, I say, could be no other woman. I step across now to beg your forgiveness 1,000 times for having been led by my feelings to express myself too strongly for a stranger. To be sure, I am no stranger to the place. I am Sergeant Troy, as I told you, and I have assisted your uncle in these fields no end of times when I was a lad. I have been doing the same for you to-day." "I suppose I must thank you for that, Sergeant Troy," said the Queen of the Corn Market in an indifferently grateful tone. The sergeant looked hurt and sad. "Indeed you must not, Miss Everdene," he said. "Why could you think such a thing necessary?" "I am glad it is not." "Why, if I may ask without offence?" "Because I don't much want to thank you for anything." "I am afraid I have made a hole with my tongue that my heart will never mend. Oh, these intolerable times, that ill luck should follow a man for honestly telling a woman she is beautiful. 'Twas the most I said, you must own that, and the least I could say. That I own myself. There is some talk I could do without more easily than money." "Indeed, that remark is a sort of digression." "No, it means that I would rather have your room than your company." "And I would rather have curses from you than kisses from any other woman, so I'll stay here." Bathsheba was absolutely speechless, and yet she could not help feeling that the assistance he was rendering forbade a harsh repulse. "Well," continued Troy, "I suppose there is a praise which is rudeness, and that may be mine. At the same time there is a treatment which is injustice, and that may be yours, because a plain, blunt man, who has never been taught concealment, speaks out his mind without exactly intending it, he is snapped off like the son of a sinner." "Indeed there is no such case between us," she said, turning away. "I don't allow strangers to be bold and impudent, even in praise of me." "Ah, it is not the fact but the method which offends you," he said carelessly. "But I have the sad satisfaction of knowing that my words, whether pleasing or offensive, are unmistakably true. Would you have had me look at you and tell my acquaintance that you are quite a commonplace woman, to save you the embarrassment of being stared at if they come near you? Not I. I couldn't tell any such ridiculous lie about a beauty to encourage a single woman in England in too excessive a modesty." "It is all pretence, what you are saying," exclaimed Bathsheba, laughing in spite of herself at the sly method. "You are a rare invention, Sergeant Troy. Why couldn't you have passed by me that night and said nothing? That was all I meant to reproach you for." "Because I wasn't going to. Half the pleasure of a feeling lies in being able to express it on the spur of the moment, and I let out mine. It would have been just the same if you had been the reversed person, ugly and old. I should have exclaimed about it in the same way." "How long is it since you have been so afflicted with strong feeling, then?" "Oh, ever since I was big enough to know loveliness from deformity."
'Tis to be hoped your sense of the difference you speak of doesn't stop at faces, but extends to morals as well."
"I won't speak of morals or religion, my own or anybody else's, though perhaps I should have been a very good Christian if you pretty women hadn't made me an idolater." Bathsheba moved on to hide the irrepressible dimplings of merriment. Troy followed, whirling his crop. "But, Miss Everdene, do you forgive me?"
"Hardly."
"Why?"
"You say such things."
"I said you were beautiful, and I'll say so still. For by— So you are, the most beautiful ever I saw, or may I fall dead this instant. Why, upon my—"
"Don't, don't! I won't listen to you. You are so profane," she said, in a restless state between distress at hearing him and a penchant to hear more.
"I say again you are a most fascinating woman. There's nothing remarkable in my saying so, is there?"
"I'm sure the fact is evident enough. Miss Everdene, my opinion may be too forcibly let out to please you, and, for the matter of that, too insignificant to convince you, but surely it is honest. Why can't it be excused?" "Because it isn't a correct one," she femininely murmured.
"Oh, fie, fie! Am I any worse for breaking the third of that terrible 10 than you are for breaking the ninth?"
"Well, it doesn't seem quite true to me that I am fascinating," she replied evasively.
"Not so to you? Then I say with all respect that, if so, it is owing to your modesty, Miss Everdene."
"But surely you must have been told by everybody of what everybody notices, and you should take their words for it." "They don't say so exactly."
"Oh yes, they must."
"Well, I mean to my face, as you do," she went on, allowing herself to be further lured into a conversation that intention had rigorously forbidden.
"But you know they think so."
"No. That is, I certainly have heard Liddy say they do, but—" She paused. Capitulation. It was the purport of the simple reply. Guarded as it was, capitulation unknown to herself. Never did a fragile, tailless sentence convey a more perfect meaning. The careless sergeant smiled within himself, and probably too the devil smiled from a loophole in Tophet. For the moment was the turning point of a career. Her tone and mien signified beyond mistake that the seed which was to lift the foundation had taken root in the chink. The remainder was a mere question of time and natural changes.
"There, the truth comes out," said the soldier in reply. "Never tell me that a young lady can live in a buzz of admiration without knowing something about it. Ah, well, Miss Everdene, you are, pardon my blunt way, you are rather an injury to your race than otherwise."
"How, indeed?" she said, opening her eyes.
"Oh, it is true enough. I may as well be hung for a sheep as a lamb. An old country saying, not of much account, but it will do for a rough soldier. And so I will speak my mind, regardless of your pleasure, and without hoping or intending to get your pardon. Why, Miss Everdene, it is in this manner that your good looks may do more harm than good in the world." The sergeant looked down the mead in critical abstraction. "Probably some one man, on an average, falls in love with each ordinary woman. She can marry him. He is content and leads a useful life. Such women as you 100 men always covet. Your eyes will bewitch scores on scores into an unavailing fancy for you. You can only marry one of that many. Out of these, say 20 will endeavour to drown the bitterness of despised love in drink. 20 more will mope away their lives without a wish or attempt to make a mark in the world, because they have no ambition apart from their attachment to you. 20 more, the susceptible person, myself possibly among them, will be always draggling after you, getting where they may just see you, and doing desperate things. Men are such constant fools. The rest may try to get over their passions with more or less success, but all these men will be saddened. And not only these 99 men, but the 99 women they may have married are saddened with them. There's my tale. That's why I say that a woman so charming as yourself, Miss Everdene, is hardly a blessing to her race." The handsome sergeant's features were during this speech as rigid and stern as John Knox's in addressing his gay young queen. Seeing she made no reply, he said, "Do you read French?" "No.
"I began, but when I got to the verbs my father died," she said simply. "I do when I have an opportunity, which latterly has not been often. My mother was a Parisienne. There is a proverb they have, Qui aime bien, châtie bien. He chastens who loves well. Do you understand me?" "Ah," she replied, and there was even a little tremulousness in the usually cool girl's voice. "If you can only fight half as winningly as you can talk, you are able to make a pleasure of a bayonet wound." And then poor Bathsheba instantly perceived her slip in making this admission. In hastily trying to retrieve it she went from bad to worse. "Don't, however, suppose that I derive any pleasure from what you tell me." "I know you do not. I know it perfectly," said Troy, with much hearty conviction on the exterior of his face, and altering the expression to moodiness. "When a dozen men are ready to speak tenderly to you, and give you the admiration you deserve without adding the warning you need, it stands to reason that my poor rough and ready mixture of praise and blame cannot convey much pleasure. Fool as I may be, I am not so conceited as to suppose that." "I think you are conceited, nevertheless," said Bathsheba, looking askance at a reed she was fitfully pulling with one hand, having lately grown feverish under the soldier's system of procedure, not because the nature of his cajolery was entirely unperceived, but because its vigour was overwhelming. "I would not own it to anybody else, nor do I exactly to you. Still, there might have been some self-conceit in my foolish supposition the other night. I knew that what I said in admiration might be an opinion too often forced upon you to give any pleasure, but I certainly did think that the kindness of your nature might prevent you judging an uncontrolled tongue harshly, which you have done, and thinking badly of me and wounding me this morning, when I am working hard to save your hay." "Well, you need not think more of that. Perhaps you did not mean to be rude to me by speaking out your mind. Indeed, I believe you did not," said the shrewd woman, in painfully innocent earnest. "And I thank you for giving help here. But mind you don't speak to me again in that way, or in any other, unless I speak to you." "Oh, Miss Bathsheba, that is too hard." "No, it isn't. Why is it?" "You will never speak to me, for I shall not be here long. I am soon going back again to the miserable monotony of drill, and perhaps our regiment will be ordered out soon. And yet you take away the one little ewe lamb of pleasure that I have in this dull life of mine. Well, perhaps generosity is not a woman's most marked characteristic." "When are you going from here?" she asked, with some interest. "In a month." "But how can it give you pleasure to speak to me?" "Can you ask, Miss Everdene, knowing as you do what my offence is based on?" "If you do care so much for a silly trifle of that kind, then I don't mind doing it," she uncertainly and doubtingly answered. "But you can't really care for a word from me. You only say so. I think you only say so." "That's unjust, but I won't repeat the remark. I am too gratified to get such a mark of your friendship at any price to cavil at the tone. I do, Miss Everdene, care for it. You may think a man foolish to want a mere word, just a good morning. Perhaps he is, I don't know. But you have never been a man looking upon a woman, and that woman yourself." "Well?" "Then you know nothing of what such an experience is like, and heaven forbid that you ever should." "Nonsense, flatterer. What is it like? I am interested in knowing." "Put shortly, it is not being able to think, hear, or look in any direction except one without wretchedness, nor there without torture." "Ah, Sergeant, it won't do. You are pretending," she said, shaking her head. "Your words are too dashing to be true." "I am not, upon the honour of a soldier." "But why is it so? Of course I ask for mere pastime." "Because you are so distracting, and I am so distracted." "You look like it." "I am indeed." "Why, you only saw me the other night." "That makes no difference. The lightning works instantaneously. I loved you then, at once, as I do now." Bathsheba surveyed him curiously, from the feet upwards, and as high as she liked to venture her glance, which was not quite so high as his eyes. "You cannot, and you don't," she said demurely. "There is no such sudden feeling in people. I won't listen to you any longer. Hear me. I wish to know what o'clock it is. I am going. I have wasted too much time here already."
The sergeant looked at his watch and told her. "What, haven't you a watch, miss?" he inquired.
"I have not just at present. I am about to get a new one."
"No, you shall be given one. Yes, you shall. A gift, Miss Everdene, a gift." And before she knew what the young man was intending, a heavy gold watch was in her hand. "It is an unusually good one for a man like me to possess," he quietly said. "That watch has a history. Press the spring and open the back." She did so. "What do you see?"
"A crest and a motto."
"A coronet with 5 points, and beneath, Credit amor rebus. Love yields to circumstance. It's the motto of the Earls of Severn. That watch belonged to the last lord. It was given to my mother's husband, a medical man, for his use till I came of age, when it was to be given to me. It was all the fortune that I ever inherited. That watch has regulated imperial interests in its time, the stately ceremonial, the courtly assignation, pompous travels, and lordly sleeps. Now it is yours."
"But, Sergeant Troy, I cannot take this. I cannot!" she exclaimed with round-eyed wonder. "A gold watch! What are you doing? Don't be such a dissembler." The sergeant retreated to avoid receiving back his gift, which she held out persistently towards him. Bathsheba followed as he retired. "Keep it, do, Miss Everdene, keep it," said the erratic child of impulse. "The fact of your possessing it makes it worth 10 times as much to me. A more plebeian one will answer my purpose just as well, and the pleasure of knowing whose heart my old one beats against—well, I won't speak of that. It is in far worthier hands than ever it has been in before." "But indeed I can't have it," she said in a perfect simmer of distress. "Oh, how can you do such a thing? That is, if you really mean it. Give me your dead father's watch, and such a valuable one. You should not be so reckless, indeed, Sergeant Troy."
"I loved my father. Good. But better, I love you more. That is how I can do it," said the sergeant, with an intonation of such exquisite fidelity to nature that it was evidently not all acted now. Her beauty, which, whilst it had been quiescent, he had praised in jest, had in its animated phases moved him to earnest, and though his seriousness was less than she imagined, it was probably more than he imagined himself. Bathsheba was brimming with agitated bewilderment, and she said in half-suspicious accents of feeling, "Can it be? Oh, how can it be that you care for me, and so suddenly? You have seen so little of me. I may not really be so nice-looking as I seem to you. Please, do take it. Oh, do! I cannot and will not have it. Believe me, your generosity is too great. I have never done you a single kindness, and why should you be so kind to me?" A factitious reply had been again upon his lips, but it was again suspended, and he looked at her with an arrested eye. The truth was, that as she now stood, excited, wild, and honest as the day, her alluring beauty bore out so fully the epithets he had bestowed upon it, that he was quite startled at his temerity in advancing them as false. He said mechanically, "Ah, why?" and continued to look at her. "And my work folk see me following you about the field, and are wondering. Oh, this is dreadful!" she went on, unconscious of the transmutation she was effacing. "I did not quite mean you to accept it at first, for it was my one poor patent of nobility," he broke out bluntly. "But upon my soul I wish you would now. Without any shamming, come. Don't deny me the happiness of wearing it for my sake. But you are too lovely even to care to be kind as others are." "No, no, don't say so. I have reasons for reserve, which I cannot explain." "Let it be, then, let it be," he said, receiving back the watch at last. "I must be leaving you now. And will you speak to me for these few weeks of my stay?" "I will indeed, yet I don't know if I will. Oh, why did you come and disturb me so?" "Perhaps in setting a gin I have caught myself. Such things have happened. Well, will you let me work in your fields?" he coaxed. "Yes, I suppose so, if it is any pleasure to you." "Miss Everdene, I thank you." "No, no." "Good-bye." The sergeant brought his hand to the cap on the slope of his head, saluted, and returned to the distant group of haymakers. Bathsheba could not face the haymakers now. Her heart erratically flitting hither and thither from perplexed excitement, hot and almost tearful, she retreated homeward, murmuring, "Oh, what have I done? What does it mean? I wish I knew how much of it was true.